What would we even need additional data? And one thing that Gurpreet mentioned is that ID resolution is a key enabler for creating a single 360-degree view of your customer. Obtaining such view requires an organization to capture as many meaningful touch points as possible. Whether customers need to find inspiration through blogs and YouTube, they need to browse offers through your website, select products in store, make purchases online, or even share and engage another community of customer. There is an increasing amount of data signals and channels to engage those customers. So these create significant amount of touch points as well. Some of them are more traditional, like you'll see on that chart, that go from radio, families, friends, and some more advanced like loyalty apps, or even through personalized messages. It therefore makes it very challenging for one organization to capture every single touch point. This is why second and third party data usually come into play to supplement the data that your own organization captures. So, but first, let's take a quick step back. Let's have that Webster moment to align our understanding of what I like to call the many party data and give you ways and example to distinguish among all of them. First party data is, of course, the data that you collect directly from your customer. Good example is on that build that app or platform or website that called My Garage. And it's a very clever way to capturing that first party data. When you start talking about second party data, think of it as just someone else's first party data that you could combine usually with your own at the individual level through postal code or actual customer ID. And one large Canadian grocer has been doing that very well by partnering in a loyalty program and made significant use of ID resolution to match their existing customers to that of a program. When we talk about now third-party data, it is also another organization first-party data, but it's usually anonymized, aggregated in the form of insights, and used to enhance your own data. If you think about the Spanish multinational BBVA, they're a financial service company that went global, and they build that marketplace that's accessible through an API and that enable developers to build applications around their data. So that customer APIs can be used by companies to complete their BBVA's business validation process or authentication, and has the ability to integrate it into their own platform. So these are some key examples with your first and second party data and how you distinguish them. Now, if we get to the next slide, several of us would consider monetization as selling third-party data asset on AWS Marketplace, or Airbnb selling rental information to municipalities. When we speak about data monetization, it's actually larger than that. And we want to provide a few examples of how it is used to unlock profitability. One set of examples is through direct revenue generation, ranging from raw data to full-fledged insights. It could be in the form of subscription of your data sets. And we have examples, you can have example of TradeWeb, for example, that sells for about $3,000 a month subscription of UK treasury bill prices. It's a high price tag, but very valuable for traders. You can unlock revenues through an analytics platform that provides you with the tools and data set for the organization to accelerate their analytics. We have our own Deloitte's Cortex AI as a great example that is a way of providing that platform with proprietary data sets that allows to accelerate those analytics within an organization. You could generate revenue as well through direct sales of insight, through a consumable dashboard. Take Airbnb City Portal that I mentioned earlier. This launched during the pandemic and provided insights into local rental activities to municipalities and local governments in order to better develop their destinations. Second, true expense reduction. This is probably the less known second term of your profit equation. And this is where you use your data to optimize your process. You don't not always have that first-hand data on the specific process, but you can leverage insight and analytics coming from others that had similar issues and similar problems, and second or third party data coming from them to better your own process. It could also be used to reduce cost of acquisition of first party data. This is important for organizations that have no cash register and need to go an extra way and go out of their core business to collect first-hand customer data. So these organizations will therefore avoid the extra cost of building an app, managing authentication system, and not collecting personal information. Now, in even a larger sense, at Deloitte, we look at data monetization in a way to generate economic benefit with data. We consider two dimensions in that framework, which represent an indirect way and represent a direct way of generating economic profits or economic benefits. The internal monetization approach, which is equivalent to the indirect way. And in that approach, you can use data for product innovation, where sentiment data can be collected across media information, different media to inform your next app feature. You can use customer service data transcript to identify common pain point of the existing customer and be proactive at solving them. You can improve your efficiencies by using a dashboard tracking system that understands peak demand period for a specific dashboard or specific report and can scale your infrastructure accordingly. Now, the more direct approach is what we call external monetization. It's about selling that as a service. AirDNA, not to be confused with Airbnb, provides insight on short-term vacation rentals. It's a good example there. As another form of external monetization, you can provide insight as a service through a dashboard on an app requiring a form of subscription. You can also, through collaborative analytics, partner with several other data providers with similar interests to improve the performance of a specific sector. A good example we've seen is in the tourism industry, where data hubs have been forming through different collaboration with partners that have the same goals. So data coming from travel agencies, airline, etc., to better the offering and have a reinvigorated travel industry. And as a general rule, you'll find it's much easier to assign a dollar value, of course, to external monetization as opposed to internal monetization. Now, all this is good, but it makes you ask the question, how do you get there as an organization? So Farad, let me ask you this. What are the key things that we need to consider to enable monetization?
Sure, Patrice. Thanks for a great question there. When you first think about data monetization and contemplating that opportunity, there are three axes that you really need to focus on. The first one is around desirability of the use case. Is this actually an area that customers want to see or companies want to see? Are there industries or internal parties, even in your own business, that can leverage the specific use case? The second one is feasibility of the capabilities. Do you have the right capabilities in place in order to be able to conduct this data monetization exercise? Do you have the right infrastructure? Do you have the right people? Do you have the right data even to be able to do this? And thirdly is the viability of the business model. What type of investment do you require in order to run it? What type of ROI will you be able to get, whether it's actually monetized for dollar amounts or whether there's intrinsic value from an ROI perspective? And when you think about these three axes, there's obviously an optimal condition that meets in the middle of these three. However, when you look at it from an internal or an external monetization perspective, as Patrice just mentioned, some of these axes may actually have a greater weight than others. And there's a relative balance that you have to then play there. So when you think about an internal monetization, you have to think more around the feasibility and the desirability of that specific use case. The viability may be less important because it may be, again, not as much of a play for dollars for revenue, but it may be actually just from an internal perspective, what type of ROI can you get intrinsically? So you think about the feasibility of the capabilities that you have to be able to share that data across internally, or from a desirability perspective, how many business units can you actually share across? When you think externally, yes, desirability and feasibility are important, but you then think about the viability. You're making this a new revenue generating service. Are you going to be able to get a strong ROI out of this? What type of investments do you have to put in order to actually develop this? So you have to think about sort of how those axes play together and what's most important when you think about this strategy around your opportunity here. I want to focus on one specific element here, specifically around the feasibility, if we go back to the previous slide, specifically around the customer consent for the relevant data set. As Patrice talked about earlier, and as Gurpreet talked about, there are a lot of data privacy laws coming into effect. There are places where customers have to have more consent, more choice around what data they want to share, or what data they want organizations to share on their behalf. And that has to come into effect when a customer or when an organization is thinking about their data monetization opportunity. Do they have the right, first of all, to collect that data for specific reasons? And if they go outside those reasons, do they have the right and ability to share that data or sell that data to other organizations, even if it's anonymized? So that has to come into play when you're looking at the intent and purpose there. And specifically, for example, when you think about a nonprofit or you think about a government entity, there are different privacy laws that come into play. For example, here in Canada, there's specific municipalities that can only collect, that have to declare their intent of why they're collecting a specific piece of data, and they can't go outside that. So when you think about data that goes for realty or for property taxes, they can't then use that data for understanding other services like transportation or needs or other needs from a municipality perspective. They have to go back to the customers and understand that. So it's very important to understand some of those feasibilities there. Now, when you move across your economic monetization journey, and if we go to the next slide, you'll notice that there's two things that will happen as you develop your data into a monetizable asset, as you maximize your economic benefit. The first is the strategic value of that data will increase. You're going from taking this data set, this raw data set, and you were figuring out how to monetize it and those data and specific insights. How to actually take those different layers that Patrice was talking about, from the raw data to, from subscription service to data sets, to actually providing the full data and insights to your customers or to your partners. The second is your cost of data is going to decrease. You go from a high cost of data, which is what you're using when you're using your data on a daily basis, that you're capturing that data, you're generating that data, to be able to monetize that data in a more low-cost fashion. You're not providing the same level of data, perhaps. You're providing more of a aggregated perspective. You're providing more of the insights, which can require lower cost of storage, of acquiring or processing the data. So you'll see that actually moves along the spectrum there. And when you tie those back together, you'll maximize your economic benefit. So I want to spend a couple minutes to just talk about that top layer there and what each of those specific steps are. The first step is laying your foundation. That's making sure you have the right data, you have the right infrastructure, you have the right governance in place, you have the right people in place. Or do you need to fill some gaps there? So you take a look at your capabilities, take a look at the gaps you have, and how do you fill those gaps in order to monetize your data? When you need to move to your production, you start actualizing all those gaps. You figure out the infrastructure you're going to need in order to be able to monetize that data. How do you structure? How do you anonymize? How do you manipulate that data in such a way that you're able to then achieve your goals for that specific opportunity? When you enable data monetization, you're setting up your various platforms, you're setting up your various data sets, your data exchanges that you need in order to monetize that data. You're making sure that all the different capabilities are in place to be able to share that data across with your partners, with your ecosystems. And finally, when you monetize your data insights, that's when you actually go out and sell to your partners, to your ecosystems, and in fact, even new customers and groups that may be interested in those specific insights or specific data. And in order to be able to do that, you need to have certain capabilities in place. The first one is your monetization or your leverage model. What type of model are you going to use there? How do you make sure everybody's aligned with it across the organization? What type of ROI, what type of investments do you have to put in place, both at the start as well as ongoing, in order to keep that data monetized? Your governance. How do you control who has access to the data? You may be not giving their raw data there. You may be giving a copy of it. You may be giving an instance of it to your customers or to whoever is the end user of that specific data set. Your ecosystem and partners. Who's interested in this data? How do you build the appropriate partners and ecosystem to not only share the data, but also if you are acting as a data exchange or a data broker, how do you also collect that data? So how do you have those different partners in place to be able to get the data as well as share it out? From an infrastructure perspective for data technology, again, it's how do you have the right data? How do you have the right layer of data, the right layer of technology, so that you're able to abstract it, you're able to provide it out to your clients without exposing your business critical data that you're using on an everyday basis. Because again, you don't want to provide them with that level, you want to provide them with a level that they can use, that they can access from their exchange perspective or from a monetization opportunity perspective. From a people and culture perspective, you need to democratize this idea of monetization and these opportunities. These opportunities may come from the people who own the P&L. It may come from your C-suites. It may come from the data scientists and the data owners, the data stewards, the people who are actually using this data. So you need to be able to democratize those opportunities and say, how can we best leverage this data, both internally, what other business units inside can use it? But if we want to also go externally, how do we do that as well? What are some of the different ideas that we can provide? And how do we then explore those opportunities to see whether it's actually something that's feasible, that's viable, that's desirable? And finally, from a privacy and security perspective, you own this data. And in the end, you are entrusted with this data from a collection perspective, whether it's from the end customer, from your own internal collection. So you need to safeguard that data. Make sure that's not being that's hacked. You have the right safeguards in place. So the data is able to move in motion or be at rest and be safe there. And then again, going to what I mentioned previously, that you have that right security around privacy, about PII. Make sure any private information is secure there. So these are all things that we at Deloitte have actually thought about as we built out an asset called CourtDex. It's an enterprise-focused decentralized data marketplace that allows two different things. It allows the asset publishers to monetize data in a privacy-preserved way, and also allows our asset consumers to access data that they couldn't before. So we sort of play the middle ground between how do you actually monetize it and how do you actually share that with your customer set. Now I want to leave off with a few different examples of how some organizations around the world are actually creating these economic opportunities with their data, how they're actually unlocking and maximizing this economic benefit. The first one is a grocery retailer. And what they found was that their website and mobile app were only providing the same content to all users. So for example, vegetarians who were browsing were seeing meat-related content, which caused obviously unpleasant experiences and resulted in many negative reviews. So what this retailer did is they took their data. They created a personalization engine that would then be able to look at what the user is looking at, look at their historicals, understand some bit of the profile of what they're looking for in terms of the type of dietary restrictions they may have or dietary preferences. And it provides those tailored content to the user so they're only seeing what they want to see. They're being offered offers that they want to see, that to be more relevant to them. And the great thing about this is it also allowed this retailer to integrate this data model within the existing production infrastructure and their architectures. It allowed them to take this large volume of data and process it for model training. So this is large amounts of data, and allowed them to automatically train, test, and deploy models weekly using the latest shopping and browsing data. So they're actually able to collect the data from their customers and use it for the models. It also allowed them to do A/B testing with a subset of customers to test those new models in production with a subset of traffic prior to being deployed to the wide-scale market. It also allowed them to see whether those models make sense and be able to determine whether those actually were the right models or whether they had to go back to the drawing board. And finally, it allowed them to provide dashboarding internally across the organization that captured detailed statistics around the input data, around dependencies, around the process data and the model output. So the whole end-to-end structure there. And there are opportunities they did by monetizing internally here was allowing them to identify any data or concept drips over time and be able to quickly innovate and manipulate the data and those concepts to be able to better meet their customer demand. So that's just one example of how they did it internally. Again, they're just looking strictly internally. Now, what RBC Ventures did is slightly different. They did more of a data sharing partnership. So for those who are unaware, RBC is one of the large big five banks here in Canada. And they have a venture arm that looks at different opportunities for partnerships. And what they did here is they took their customer profiles for customers at the bank and they anonymized them and essentially provide these data sets as a broker to their partners. And these partners were startups, were smaller organizations that had ancillary or complementary services, such as home renovations, home management, home purchasing, so anything across the home life cycle, even when you move. They also had services that are new immigrant resources. So how do immigrants who come to Canada, what are they looking for from a banking perspective, from a job perspective? How do those all tie in? And even small business services. So how do small businesses register themselves, incorporate themselves, start getting themselves off the ground and be able to grow to scale? It allowed RBC then to better understand those needs of the customers, essentially collect that data from their customers or from these services, understand what these customers are doing outside just the traditional banking infrastructure, traditional banking needs, and tie into those partnerships and allow services or offers that are limited time. So for example, if a small business is starting up, they'd be able to then tie into a limited time offer for a small business account or banking account that would then allow them to reduce their expenses and allow them to grow and be able to have more of the services RBC offers. And it allows these smaller startups who do not have the ability to get these partnerships or to be able to get this data right off the bat to access these larger second-party data sets. Again, yes, they're anonymized, but it allows them to tie into those data sets to understand, are there new capabilities, are there new partnerships or new customers that they'll be able to grow with. So these are two internal monetization opportunities. And Patrice, I'd love to hear a few more examples, perhaps, of how some of these organizations are doing it from an external perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. You take Visa and MasterCard. They're a good example of internal and external monetization. These are very known brands, let's say, of credit cards, known globally. And just imagine that with the amount of credit cards out there, the amount of customer transaction globally that they have access to. So this turned into a gold mine for them, and they build their offering for customers and advisory services on the basis of the customer transaction and the inferred social, economic, and lifestyle data that they collected. You take the example of Visa, they build this thing called the Visa Global Spending Momentum Index that really looks at trends all across the world of customer spending habits. MasterCard has something called Spending Pulse Solutions that really helps unlock market intelligence on customer spending by measuring in-store and online retail sales across all forms of payments that involve MasterCard. Who use it? Retailers, hotels, airlines, and they usually make use of that data for market forecasting, identifying shifts, planning their staffing. Financial institutions even use it to benchmark their portfolio performance against that of retail economic activities. We've seen also organizations, like I mentioned before, that don't necessarily have a cash register to understand spending patterns of travelers coming in and out of Canada. So this has been, like Farhan mentioned earlier, also a great way for organizations to start themselves up, and a great way also of saving a lot of cost from getting to acquire all that data by themselves. And both these organizations, Visa and MasterCard, have also set up advisory services because they understood that the proprietary data on which they're sitting on has been very insightful for those different organizations that they sell it to. And it ranges from on the spectrum from being able to get access to a raw data set all the way to an insight platform, and even pushing it even further with advisory services. Now, the last example is really about building an insight platform like JP Morgan and Chase did. And what they do is that they provide this very comprehensive suite of data analytics and reporting solution for the buy side. They created that comprehensive market and pricing data sets, around analytics and reporting tools. And of course, from there, you can query the data directly or even receive insight as a service. And the baseline of that information and that insight is, of course, all the trading and financial market data that's accumulated through the years.